Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jack McDougall, and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. Very much appreciate it. Looking forward to an interesting conversation here today. Ajay, where are you? Ajay, hey, Ajay, I just want to thank you and the team here at the Costello Business School for hosting us today. Very much appreciate that, too. Jamil, thank you for joining us today and for facilitating the conversation. And Congressman Beyer, thank you very much for taking the time to share some of your thoughts and insights with us around AI. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, and you probably have seen some of this before, but I was just kind of pulling it up. What are the adoption rates for new technology to get to 50 million people? You've probably seen these charts before. Radio, it took 38 years for radio to reach 50 million people. Television took 13 years. Cable TV, 25 years. VCRs, 15 years. The internet, 7 years. AI, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT in particular, guess?
6 months.
2 years, or 2 months, sorry, 2 months. Now, the only thing that beat it was Angry Birds. Angry Birds hit 50 million downloads in 32 days. Beat it. But nonetheless, speed is just accelerating. And it's really hard to keep track of where things are and where things are going. So going to be a really interesting conversation, and appreciate it, and look forward to it. And so with that, Jamil and, or no, we're actually, Ajay, you're coming up, yes. All right, thank you.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see all of you, and welcome to this wonderful new facility we have at George Mason University, the Fuse, and officially the building is still to open, but we're getting a free preview over here of things to come. It really is fantastic. So I want to just introduce myself. My name is Ajay Vinze. I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as Dean of the Costello College of Business over here at George Mason University. Welcome to all of you to our Arlington campus, campus of George Mason University, now the largest university in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And this is going to be a very fun thing. I think Jack set it up in a nice way in terms of how fast things are moving with AI and how quickly we have to do things. And I had the pleasure of just briefly speaking to the congressman in the back over there. And it's interesting with this technology, a lot that is going to happen is going to be predicated on what kind of guardrails we put on this technology and how we legally, societally, and otherwise otherwise it's only imagination that's going to move this technology. So it's a great time to have this conversation, the future of AI. Just a quick word about Congressman Beyer. Congressman Beyer is serving his 5th term as U.S. representative from Virginia's 8th district, representing Arlington, Alexandria Falls Church, and parts of Fairfax County. He serves on the Congress Joint Economic Committee. He serves on the House Committee of Ways and Means. And he certainly is a pillar in Northern Virginia, and not just the business, but Northern Virginia society and community as a whole. What's really interesting and important, and I'll get to that in a second, but I also noticed this wide spectrum view to things. He served as ambassador of Switzerland and to Switzerland and Liechtenstein in 2009. And what really caught my attention was much before all of this technology business became very interesting or exciting or things that got on our radar. In 1991, he was the founding person for Northern Virginia Tech Council, which is well before all the internet business got going and so on. So to have that kind of vision at that time suggests he has perspective that's certainly worth listening to. So I'm thrilled and delighted that he's here speaking with us and our very own Jamil Jaffer, who's going to moderate today's conversation. Jamil is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute and an assistant professor of law in the Antonin Scalia Law School. He also is a venture partner in Palladium Capital Group. So welcome to you all. Welcome to George Mason University, and I think we are in for a treat.
Jamil? Good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Please. So folks, it's great to be here with you. I'm thrilled to be here with Congressman Don Beyer. I know Ajay gave him a little bit of an introduction. I'll give you a little bit more detail, though, on the distinguished career that Congressman Beyer has had. You obviously all know him from his stable of car dealerships that are here in the Northern Virginia area. But what you might not know is that he began in the car dealership business with a summer internship in 1974 at a car dealership. And that's how it all began for him. He's a graduate of Gonzaga High School here in the D.C. area, Williams College as well. He was a presidential scholar under President Johnson. He's got 4 children, 2 grandchildren. His wife, Megan, is also here in the community. I am married to Megan as well, so I'm thrilled to have two husbands of Megan's. People often refer to me as Mr. Jaffer, not out of distinction, but because they all know my wife and don't know me. It's pretty amazing. Congressman Beyer, as the dean said, is in his 5th term here, serving in Virginia's 8th. I worked for Congressman Bob Goodlatte when he represented Virginia's 6th. But he's also been the lieutenant governor of Virginia from 1990 to 1998. He was the Democratic nominee in 97 for the governor and was the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein under President Obama. Today, he serves on the Joint Economic Committee, where he's the senior House Democrat. Boy, there's going to be a lot of work on that committee. And serves on the highly influential House Ways and Means Committee, where he serves on both the committees on trade and tax. So again, probably a lot of work to do there. He was also a key member, as we're going to talk about today, of the House Bipartisan Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, was instrumental in key parts of the task force's report that was just released in December of last year. So with that, if it's all right, we might jump into it. Is that all right?
That sounds great. Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, so one of the things I thought was fascinating about your experience is that you don't just talk about lifelong learning, you're actually doing it. And did I hear right that you're actually enrolled in a program here at Mesa? Is that true?
That is true.
Tell us about that.
Well,
you're currently enrolled, to be clear.
yeah. I had a quiz yesterday. Yeah, and a lab tomorrow.
For real.
Well, first of all, I'm here with the former Secretary of Education for Virginia, Jim Dyke. So it's always great to have a role model here. So thank you for doing that. And when I was in high school, I wanted to be a theoretical physicist.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then I got to college and figured I wasn't smart enough to be a theoretical physicist. So I studied economics and things like that. That summer internship was actually, I came back to go to Georgetown Med School, summer 74. My father and mother had just purchased a little Volvo dealership. We had like 12 employees. And so the summer internship was my father saying, I need a parts driver, and that's the only skill you have after 4 years at Williams.
I mean, he's probably right. I mean,
exactly right, yeah.
Econ major Williams, right? Like, parts driver pretty good.
Yeah, so I ended up staying, which was actually a wonderful thing for me, for the family, for the career. But I never lost my desire to try to understand more stuff. My favorite book as a kid was the Foundation Trilogy. And I hope some of you have read it.
It's amazing. If you have not read it, it's worth reading.
And the whole notion of the science of psychohistory, that scientists, social scientists and hard scientists had figured out from human behavior and from basically large language models from 70 years ago, right? What the future is going to look like and then plan for it. And it's always fascinated me that you could do that. And many years ago, Eric Severide gave a graduation speech, I think at William and Mary. And I read about it in the Christian Science Monitor. This is late 70s. And he said that the great challenge was we're generating so much information that we can't process just a fraction of it. And this was 50 some years ago. Yeah. So right now, the great throwaway factoid is we generate more information every year than in the previous 2,000 years since the modern era. And much of it, 90+% of the satellite data every day is never even looked at. So the notion of being some kind of tool that can sort out meaning and find correlations, connections, and maybe cause an effect from this enormous amount of data was just really exciting to me. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Claude Shannon, who was the father of information theory. Nobody talks about a second theory of information. This is from Bell Labs in the late 40s, that at every instant in the universe, there's more information than there was the instant before. That the complexity in the universe just keeps getting greater and greater. It's the opposite of the second law of thermodynamics, the unwinding of entropy. So all that was me. It's a couple, like 4 years ago, I was wandering through this building with George Mason leadership, and they were showing me the new Innovation Center somewhere at the back. I thought, this is so cool. Can I take courses here? And they
didn't know you were serious.
Yeah, I'm sure they thought I was kidding.
Yeah.
But I followed up by email, and they still didn't think I was serious. And they said that the registration deadline had passed.
Of course.
Yeah, and I said, well,
We can't change that.
yeah. But anyway, they did change it
Yeah.
and let me into the class. So I'm now in my 10th class.
And you're doing a master's degree in AI, is that
Yeah,
right?
although I'm right now, I'm doing CS 262 for those who are keeping track of that.
Yeah.
And then linear algebra starts in the middle of May. And then
That sounds horrible.
CS 367 in the
my
fall.
God.
And then I will have finished all my prerequisites. So I won't actually be a graduate student until next.
So you're taking
That's if they let me in.
So you're taking actual classes in machine learning. You're taking linear algebra.
Yeah. Well, the math's a lot easier than the coding, I promise you.
I bet that's right. Well,
Yeah.
let's
The hardest part is driving from D.C. to Fairfax City 3 days a week.
Well, we're gonna have classes over here at the Fuse building,
I
so
know.
hopefully we'll
I'm
solve for
rooting
that.
for that. I was talking to Ajay. I thought because I have to take the hot lanes. My Easy Pass bill was $280 last month. I haven't told my wife that yet.
Yeah, well, I believe you.
But the hot lanes are great. But to get back,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. So
It's wonderful fun.
Let's talk about the easy stuff. We're not talking about there's going to be no linear algebra today for the audience. So we're going to talk about federal AI policy, and you've been a leader in this space. You were on the task force, helped with the report, but you also introduced legislation.
Yeah.
You've got a bill, the AI Foundation Model Transparency Act. Tell us about what your sort of theory behind the bill is, and why this legislation you think is so important.
Yeah. Well, first, Jamil, I really. The task force was one of the highlights of the 10 years I've been there, mostly because it was so completely bipartisan. Led by the Republicans on the one side, by Jay Obernolte, who has a master's in machine learning from Caltech, and Ted Lieu on the Democratic side, who majored in computer science at Stanford. So smart guys, good guys, and 12 men, 12 women, 12 Democrats, 12 Republicans, and we did everything together. Which I really appreciate. 270-page report, which I encourage you to read tonight. And every one of the reports in there, everyone signed off on. It generated a bunch of pieces of legislation, 14, I think, and everyone was co-sponsored by every Democrat and every Republican.
Is that right?
And so unlike much of what happens on the Hill. Yeah. So I was very proud of it. One of the two that I chose to champion was this Large Language Model, Foundation Model Transparency Act. The foundation models were the four big ones. They're measuring it by flops. Yep. So Google, Microsoft, ChatGPT, or OpenAI, and Anthropic.
Flops being floating point operations per second.
Thank you very much, yes. Anyway, I was just told never to use decimal places in a speech. Right?
I mean,
anyway.
look, you're the one in linear algebra and these computational classes.
Yeah, thank you, yeah. And so the notion is that while they are wonderful, and the whole neural net stuff is very, very exciting, nevertheless, the consumer deserves some amount of transparency on it. Yeah. Not regulation, not like the EU AI Act where you have to register everything and get permission to do this and that, but rather, what's the information the models are being trained on? Because one of the very first things that came up with AI was the issue of bias. That if you look and say, who's the best CEO, and you only interview current CEOs, you're only going to generate an older white man. Or as the famous examples with, I think it was Google on Gemini, facial recognition technology with black faces versus white faces, et cetera. There's a wonderful firm called Equal AI that Miriam Vogel founded 7-8 years ago just to deal with the issue of bias in the model themselves. So first is transparency on that. Second is FDA, we don't allow the FDA they don't approve a drug for us to take until the company that manufactures the drug has tested it again and again. FDA doesn't test it. Right. But they set the standards for the testing. There should be testing done at the foundation model also. Right. So a number of things like that are not overly prescriptive or overly regulatory. We're not trying to raise costs.
Yeah.
Just make sure that the percentage of false data you're going to get out of it, the hallucinations and the like, is minimized.
Yeah. So you raised,
and red teaming is a part of that. So.
Yeah. So you raised the point about the EU AI Act. This is a large piece of legislation that the European Union enacted recently. Will go into effect. Parts of it already gone into effect just last month. More will go, or a month and a half ago. More will go into effect here shortly. Tell us about sort of as the task force came together and talked about in a bipartisan manner what the U.S. policy should be on regulation versus innovation. We've always had a very low regulatory environment when it comes to modern technology. It's part of why I think we've seen the massive innovation in the United States and relatively less innovation in the EU. Talk about how that applies in the AI domain and how folks were thinking about on the Hill, given that there's been a lot of concern expressed about AI, whether it's from this idea that you might need to regulate it or address it like it's a global pandemics or nuclear weapons. There are folks who talk about worker dislocation. How should we be thinking about AI? And is the right approach regulation? Is it innovation? Is it something in the middle? You've talked about AI transparency. What's the right way to think about this? And are the Europeans doing it wrong?
Okay, yes. And I would say overall, you want to think center right or center right. Yeah. I think the theory of the task force was light touch regulation. Not no regulation, but rather light touch. Yeah. There's almost wholesale rejection in the task force, in Congress, in the community, the tech community, of the EU approach. And we point out and look and say, what kind of innovation has come out of the EU in information technology? And no one can think of any. So they say that the proof's in the pudding.
Yeah.
They're too small, too restrictive, and it was. So in fact, the EU, I've met with them a dozen times. They even described themselves as a regulatory superpower, which we clearly did not want to be.
Right.
Even as a liberal Democrat, right? So,
right.
So the theory of the task force was light touch, like the foundation model.
Yeah.
And even the Biden executive order, which is the largest executive order in American history, was still intended to be light touch.
There are people who disagree about how light touch it was.
Yeah. We moved to the new president, and that's almost a no touch at the moment.
Right.
Which is interesting because the Sam Altmans and Eric Schmidts and Jack Clark's, all of them think there needs to be regulation. Most of them will say not too much and not yet.
Yeah.
The old, is it St. Thomas Aquinas or one of those people? Yeah.
Make
me holy, but not yet.
It is interesting how the incumbents are welcoming regulation. There's a theory about that, right? There are those, J.D. Vance, who said famously in Paris, the reason the incumbents want regulation is they want to protect their own sort of early edge, and they've got the resources to deal with it, and you might be crushing new innovation if you regulate now and give the Jack Clarks and the Sam Altmans of the world what they want.
Yes, exactly. And let me just step back for one, but you're absolutely right. That was one of the concerns, which is why Musk fought the pause letter, because he thought that what the pause letter was going to do was give a huge competitive advantage to the ones that are already established.
Right, as opposed to his XAI, which just bought his X platform for, they both valued each other at ridiculous amounts.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like Tesla's value. Anyway, Soken is a car dealer. But the real challenge, if you step back a minute, is on the one hand, the doomsday people, people like Stuart Russell, who wrote the AI textbook at Berkeley, and Mark Andreessen, on the other hand, who wrote the Technology Manifesto, which I really encourage you to read. It only takes about 5 or 7 minutes, but it is like wildly optimistic.
Yeah.
Really cool if you believed all of it. Yeah. And the reality's got to be somewhere in between.
Right.
From absolutely no holds barred to shutting the whole thing down.
Yeah. And so what do you think about that? I mean, what is the right, how should people think about AI? I tend to be on the AI sort of optimist side. I tend to think
me
it's
too.
Going to be, I think it's going to be a tide that raises all boats. I do see there are obviously going to be challenges. There are going to be massive dislocations of the workforce. I tend to think we can deal with them. The question is, how do we get ahead of them and prepare for them? And my instinct is that you want to figure out a way to incentivize businesses to bake in trust, safety, and security, in part because you'll get more adoption if people trust the systems, if their data's not leaking out, right, and the like. But I do think there's this debate about how regulatory to be. We know the Europeans are going to be out there in a big way. You do see headlines that suggest we're behind Europe when it comes to regulation. That seems crazy.
Yeah, and I don't think we are.
Yeah.
We don't. This is interesting to see how this will evolve. One of the things that the Biden EO did was set up a safety institute at the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST. And in the last couple of years, NIST had developed its own framework for AI. This is what responsible, trustable AI looks like. They did it with 2 people or 3 people. And so one of the pieces of legislation that Ted Lieu and I, who's the Democrat, put together, but with a lot of Republican support, was the notion that the federal government should use the NIST framework. Federal government contractors should use the NIST framework for their government work.
See, I love that because that uses the government's buying power to get the goals they want without regulating industry writ large. Government's still a huge buyer. It'll make a difference.
Yeah, it definitely, and it will trickle out to the rest of the economy. Yeah. Now, Donald Trump, and we also put in legislation since the executive order created the Safety Institute, that we wanted to put it in the law too.
Well, and that's what's
and that was bipartisan, completely bipartisan.
Right.
And it will have a Trump fingerprints on it, which is fine.
Yeah.
So that's coming, we think. And it will be lighter touch than probably it would have been in a Biden administration, but will still be, NIST in the historic role it's played for 150 years in American life.
Right. Right. So as we're thinking about sort of the efforts going forward, I was recently on a panel or hosted a panel with the CISO of Anthropic. And he said that today, roughly half the code that makes up Claude, Anthropic's large language model, is written by Claude. And he says by the end of the year, it'll be upwards of 90%. And he said the guardrail, though, for Anthropic, because Anthropic prides itself, Jack Clark and Dario Amodei, pride themselves on trying to make sure they're doing it the right way. He said the constraint is when the model creates a 1,000x improvement in itself in a single year, that's when the sort of circuit breakers kick in. That seems pretty wild. I mean, do we need to be thinking about circuit breakers? And if we do, should we be worried about constraining innovation? What's the right way for us to think about these issues?
There's so many things I want to say about this. First of all, just the whole notion of synthetic data.
Yeah.
We all like as scientists to be using as much data as possible to decide to make really good decisions. What happens when 90% of the data is actually made up by the machine that's measuring the data? Yeah. Is it really data?
Right. And what about the problem of sort of these LLMs sort of looping in on themselves and actually becoming, some of them suggest they might become dumber as they sort of learn on their own on poor data, and that'll just create sort of a downward spiral to...
You talk about that within a large language model, but you think about the internet too, where by some point of here, 2030, 90% of the internet will have been generated by the internet. So it's not fresh, new, interesting data. It's stuff that's been generated from stuff that went before. On the other hand, the fact that you can tell a large language model the rules to chess, and it can come out with entirely new ways to play chess or Go. They can't figure out bridge yet, but
I mean, if you've seen AlphaGo, if you haven't seen AlphaGo, it is amazing to watch because there's a move that the machine learning model made by DeepMind, which is now part of Google, it makes a move, and you see all the Go experts are like, "Oh, that's a terrible move. The computer made a mistake." And what they didn't realize was the computer's playing so many moves that have even the best player that in the moment it was a worse move, but in the long run it ultimately won the computer the game.
Exactly right. It's incredibly fascinating. You're an optimist. I'm an incredible AI optimist.
Yeah.
I had a fascinating conversation earlier this week with a friend who's on the board of an AI medical company, not a large language model, because the only thing they're training it on is medical data. Okay. Lots and lots of research, lots and lots, in the millions of what. And he said he was beginning to start to tell me the stories. Yeah. But the most interesting story was, a sister of one of the developers was diagnosed with ALS 3 years ago. Death sentence, they figured 5 years to leave. They plugged all of her data into the machine, came back in 5 minutes and said she doesn't have ALS. She has a different neurological disease, which is in fact curable. Wow. They changed her own medicine and she's walking again. Wow. So the death sentence went away. So if you use this, that's one case. If you can take that, I've had a bill for years called the medical misdiagnosis, which throws away the numbers that there are 10,000 deaths every year from medical misdiagnosis at a cost of about $10 billion. Yeah. An enormous amount of difference in our American society just figuring out how to get the diagnosis right in the first place.
I want to talk about some of your history here in Virginia. You, when you were on the chair of the Virginia Economic Recovery Commission, You passed permanent pro-business reform here, and you got it through the legislature. Talk to us about how we should be thinking about the workforce challenges that AI presents, because you talk about a Dario Amodei who co-founded Anthropic, and he talks about the loss of massive amounts of jobs. Now, I think he has an optimism that also talks about the jobs that will be created, but he describes a workforce that will be fundamentally different than it is today, and not that far in the future. How should we be thinking about the workforce challenge, and how should we be thinking about preparing one society for it, but also the dislocation that may be inevitable?
Yeah. Before we end, let's talk about the existential challenge too. Because when I look at the downsides of AI, the bell-shaped curve on the one hand is the existential threat out here, and on this side, the dislocation of workers.
Yeah. Because
it is immediate. And of course, I'm telling you stuff you already know. The agricultural revolution, enormous loss from 99% down to 1 or 2%, but it took years to do that, centuries to do it. Industrial revolution, decades. Yeah. Information revolution, a decade or two. This could be months, certainly no more than years. Wow. So it's going to happen so much faster than we can adapt to.
Are we ready?
No, we're not ready at all, and we need to be talking about it much more and thinking about it. Well, in the short run, we have close to 20,000 people inside the Beltway that have been fired in the last 3 weeks, and that doesn't include the contractors. So we're seeing that right away. But take that on a global scale or a national scale. So many different jobs that will no longer be needed. On the optimistic side, you go back to John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s, who said we can look forward to the 8-hour work week. We still are working 42 and a half hours a week on average. But you can imagine an AI world where you can generate just as much GDP as we have right now with many few hours worked, which could mean a different lifestyle for all Americans.
Right. How will it be spread? How will that GDP?
That's the hard part. Yep. Yeah. And especially when one of the things that technology has done is exaggerated the income inequality.
Right.
I mean, it's so much. We're at most income inequality in the history of the country, which drives a lot of elections too, people that are left behind.
Right.
And one of the things with technology, globalization, and trade is we have never figured out how to take care of those left behind. Trade adjustment assistance, it's hard to see that it ever worked. So
part of why we're paying the price for that now. I mean, we're always told it was going to raise all boats, and it created dislocation.
Yeah. Well, part of what's going on right now is an anti-intellectualism that is fostered by the people left behind, who used to be able to make a good living and buy a house and raise their kids based on a high school education.
Right.
And even now with just a college education, it's not easy. Which young person can afford to buy a house in Arlington?
Yeah. It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So talk to us about as we look to the future. Right. You're an optimist when it comes to AI. How do you see this play out? If we think about let's not even talk about 10 or more years, 5 years from now. What does the world look like? What should we be thinking about? Put aside sort of the politics and the challenges we're facing here, which obviously, I mean, every day is a different show. How should we think about the world in 5 years from now as these large language models become bigger and more capable, and they start replacing some of the things that we do day to day? I use AI tools every day, every hour. I hardly Google anything anymore. It's all putting into the LLMs, and I do it with 3 or 4 different ones and get different answers. I mean, what does the future look like to you, and what should we be excited about? What should we be worried about? And then we're going to take some audience questions.
Okay. I will be excited about, first of all, one of my favorite technologies is management.
Okay.
Which we tend not to think of as management. In the business school, I'm sure we do.
Yeah.
And the notion of using AI to make management so much better. Every time I see a 2-hour line at the airport, I think, who's the manager here? And why aren't they readjusting these things? So I think that breakthrough, and I think you've already beginning to see it in places like the IRS, or Jack was, I think, talking about getting your passport the next day. Where they have used technology and specifically artificial intelligence to make things faster, easier, better for everybody will be terrific. By the way, the cool part, you go back to Mark Andreessen and the Technology Manifesto, every breakthrough in technology, including the wheel and fire, created more jobs than it eliminated.
Right.
You know,
Different jobs.
different jobs, very different jobs. I mean, I get a lot of guff about NAFTA, which I supported enthusiastically. Yeah. And it did displace an awful lot of people, but we had 100 million jobs in 2000. We have 150 million jobs in the country. You know, 25
And raised
years
GDP.
Later. Way up, yeah.
And raised standards of living.
Yeah, yeah.
It may have created different inequalities, but net.
Exactly. And even though there's certainly food insecurity and people are still hungry, there are an awful lot of poor people that have a lot more resources and homes and cell phones and cars than ever had before. That's right. This is before yesterday's tariffs, by the way, but
we could get into it. I mean, it is. I mean, the way these tariffs when they came out, it is astounding, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of, it's hard to believe.
Yeah. So, although one thing, to step back, the one thing that technology doesn't replace is the human touch things. Technology is not replacing therapy. It's not replacing actual teachers. Yeah. It's not replacing people taking care of all the Alzheimer's patients.
And it can't.
No, and it can't. Or the people that clean the house. Now, one of the things we do is those tend to be the underpaid things. Yeah. I would love to see a society in which we put a lot more money into the people that did human touching, caring type things, because that's irreplaceable. Yeah. And that would require a lot more need for the human beings that are displaced.
I mean, that might actually happen if, in fact, incomes are rising as a result of this AI adoption and there need to be more human touch jobs. That might actually be one potential beneficial outcome.
Yeah. In the meantime, I think we're going to have to be really creative about what do we need. Yeah. If let's just say we displace 100,000 people in Northern Virginia because of AI and we want to put them back to work. What do we want them to do? You know, what do we value? What are we willing to pay for? That makes all of our lives better.
Interesting. Well, folks in the audience, if you have questions, we have a microphone. We have microphones at both sides. Please come on down. We're happy to take some questions. I've got a million questions. I can keep going for hours. But if there are folks, looks like we got a question right here. Sir.
Good afternoon. Gaston Arauz with Dominion Energy. Good to see you, Congressman.
Gaston, nice to see you.
I wanted to ask a question about the energy demand, but the comment that you made about the chess game and how the computer made a wrong move or a move that didn't seem right, but in the long term was the right move. I wanted to ask the Congressman, what move would you like to make today that seems wrong, but in the long term will be the right one that will benefit, for example, your two grandchildren?
What a wonderful question. And you just gave me a chance to talk about my favorite subject, which is fusion energy. You know, I founded the Fusion Caucus. We have 110 members right now, pushing hard to get that to happen. And most people look at me like I'm just, got two heads. But if we can make fusion energy happen, which is the energy of the sun, we know it works. It's been around for 14.3 billion years. It powers more stars than we can count. And all of a sudden, the next energy source becomes the last energy source. And then we don't have to worry about what's powering the large language models. We don't have to worry about fossil fuel in climate change. You just go on and on. We had 2 billion people going to bed hungry every night worldwide. 27 of those 28 desperately poor countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. The scarce resource is energy. Economics is the allocation of scarce resources. What if energy wasn't scarce? What if it was virtually free? Because fusion energy runs on water with no radioactive waste, and the only byproduct is helium, which disappears in the atmosphere. We could have a dramatically different world for centuries and centuries to come. But you have to think long term about it, because people have said, oh, that will never happen. But my favorite piece of wisdom is whatever we pay attention to in our lives grows and changes. So we pay attention to fusion, we will see it in our lifetime. And we will transform everything.
And we have seen a few recent sort of big breakthroughs.
Yeah, every couple of months. Yeah. And including the big one 3 years ago was Lawrence Livermore getting more energy out than they put in.
Right, which is sort of the trick. Yeah. That's the key thing.
He probably asked this because Dominion Energy and Gaston have put together a deal with Commonwealth Fusion out of Devens, Massachusetts, is an MIT spinoff, to open the fusion energy power plant in the world in Chesterfield County. Sometime in the next couple of years. So, and they turn on their first fusion reactor, their test one, next year in Massachusetts, the ARC.
Yeah, interesting.
So we'll actually see.
Well, it looks like we're still waiting for folks to come up. So let me ask you a follow-up question to that as we're talking about this. One of the things that people have talked a lot about is about the need for power to power these LLMs, and we're just talking about fusion energy. You mentioned it yourself. We've talked about the data centers, the data center problem, and people often ask, where is this cloud? And if you drive out to Loudoun County, the cloud is here. Right? I mean, you look at these massive data centers. A huge portion of America's data center capacity is right here in Northern Virginia. But we do have power challenges. Even out there where the power is plentiful, it does appear that if we continue to build data centers at the rate we're doing, and we continue to build them across the country, we're going to run into challenges. Before fusion is here, what's the next best approach? Wind, solar seems hard to get at scale. Nuclear, people have concerns. It does seem to be the one clean solution if you don't have a problem. And then, of course, fossil fuels are what they are. What do we do in the meantime?
I think we have to be an all of the above economy.
Yeah.
And wind and solar are coming quickly, not quickly enough. Geothermal is just stepping onto the stage, but it will be important in the years to come.
Yeah.
I guess we did 2 small modular reactors last year, and there will be many, many more that are planned, often around data centers.
Right.
And
these are nuclear reactors, but in sort of a small form.
But they're fission. Yeah, the kind that power a submarine.
Yeah.
Or a ship. And so very little worry now about nuclear waste. Was it the Norwegians or the Swedes that just decided there's finally a storage place to put?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, the
plutonium. It's not Yucca Mountain?
Not Yucca Mountain, yeah. You got to get it there. But and then if you pay attention to what's happening, the industry is moving really, really quickly to make the chips that are ever more energy efficient.
Yeah.
So that's cutting in half every couple of years. So the amount of power that you needed to run those plants in Loudoun last year will be very, very different next year.
Amazing.
And same with water.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So and then you look. I know it's controversial, but I don't live in Pennsylvania County, down in Danville, but they're planning another big data center down there with I think it's an LNG power plant.
Alongside it,
which is along an existing LNG pipeline, and so on all. But right now, it's not just America. I think is it 2/3 of the data centers in the world are in Northern Virginia.
It's wild. It's amazing.
Which, by the way, I checked this morning that the Fairfax County real estate tax rate's $1.14, and it's 80 cents in Loudoun County.
It's amazing.
It's a very different thing from a county government standpoint.
Very much so.
Yeah. Are they really? Wow.
Yeah. All right, we have another question, please.
Sorry. Hi. My name's Olivia. I'm a student actually at GMU as well,
Awesome.
but specifically in applied computer science with our new concentration in tech policy.
Are you in linear algebra too?
No, I think that's actually my next semester.
Oh boy.
Good.
No, I'm in calculus right now.
Good.
But
I get to speak at the calculus Olympiad Saturday morning. I hope you're
I'm not that good.
You're not competing in it? Or?
No, I'm not that good. I think I might just bring GMU's score down.
I'm working on my math jokes right now. So
Good.
That's right. I took calculus in college at UCLA, and I actually slept with my calculus textbook under my pillow in my dorm room in the hopes that it would work through osmosis. It did not work, and I got a C in that class. So don't try that. It doesn't work.
We don't have textbooks really anymore. So.
Wow. I just did it myself. Brutal.
Sorry.
All right, I'm gonna go home and cry now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Me too. But no, I guess I have more so 2 questions. One, maybe a simpler one. I'm very interested, especially with cybersecurity. So obviously the transparency of language models and AI in general is very interesting. But I'm also interested if you have any idea how this might affect things like copyright laws and things like, what it starts with a P.
Patents.
Thank you. Yeah. Patents, and especially since ignoring maybe language models, but image and video AIs usually are utilizing artists or writers or different creators. And there's a lot of discussion, I know, especially in creative communities, about what do we do with copyright in those situations. And I guess if that one's a little too far off of what you know, I don't know. I'm also interested in who you think realistically will have access to higher AI power and who should have access to higher AI power.
Thank you for teeing that up. By the way, the one math joke I'm ready with is never mind. I'll come back to it. The whole notion of
I've got one.
Okay.
What's a bird's favorite form of math? Algebra.
Oh, okay. Mine is there are only 10 kind of people who understand binary math. Those who do and those who don't. So anyway, so two responses. Number one is you're right on the button on the issue of intellectual property. We among the hearings that we had on the task force was with the artists and the illustrators and the photographers. Once their art, illustrations, photo are uploaded into the billions, anybody can generate it. The stuff my daughters generate, say, give me this picture, and 5 minutes later, 3 minutes later, it's printed out in color with all kinds of incredible nuance and description. Same with music creators. That's easy for the large language models to write tunes, melodies, harmonies, and the like. And same with books. There was a story, I think, in the Post this morning, that you'll see a book on Amazon, a novel, and 3 days later there are spin-offs of it. They've copied them in, and that will be slight changes to the plot, to the names, even the cover, just slight changes to the cover that are available. My friend Charlie Rifkin, who runs the Motion Picture Association of America, they're terrified about the fact that you can put, Top Gun Maverick in and get a new Top Gun Maverick out in a couple of hours, based on that. And we do not have solutions. A couple of years ago, everyone talked about watermarking, but that's become so quickly to overcome. And the other side of that is the ability to generate child sexual assault material, which has exploded since AI. And how do you deal with it because you don't have child victims because the images are all generated by the computer. And then you have the deep fakes. One of the more interesting pieces of legislation is the Defiance Act, which AOC sponsors, just creating a cause of action if somebody takes Jamil's photos and stuff and turns it into some ugly images, whether they're sexual or non-sexual. Can you sue, and who do you sue? Right. There are enormous other challenges that it will generate.
Huge questions. Well, Congressman, I have one last question as we wrap up for the afternoon. Yeah. So one. Oh, great. Better your question than mine. Absolutely, I love it.
It's okay. Matt Lebovich from PwC. I'm curious. We've talked a lot about data centers and chips, and in a sense, scarcity, right? Scarcity of the resource. Yeah. I'm curious. Should AI be a national security concern? Meaning, do we need to think about how we protect it for ourselves in the United States? Because there's, in my space, I've seen discussions globally about, different sovereign territories ensuring they have the right capacity, the chips, the power to be able to do it, unencumbered by anybody else. So I'm just curious in these discussions, from a national security perspective, how do we view, or how will we view AI?
Yeah.
And might we see new alliances around tech innovation in this new world order?
Maybe before I answer that, let me just do one other thing which is the whole notion of the democratization of AI. Who gets to use it and why? One of the most interesting pieces of legislation out of the task force, probably the most unanimous one, was the Create AI Act, which is actually using the federal government, the National Science Foundation, to create the compute and to create the data sets so that everybody has the opportunity to use AI in a creative way. So it's not just limited to people that can afford to build a large language model. To the national security issue, you listen to Mark Warner, who's the most recent chair of the Senate Intel Committee, Mike Turner, the most recent chair of the House Intel Committee. Two of them agree. Should still be, yeah, absolutely. I would agree with both of it. But anyway, I'm very disappointed. But anyway, both of them would say the number one issue in our century-long tussle with China on who writes the rules of the road will be who gets to AI first, who gets to AGI, artificial general intelligence. So it is a huge national security concern. And you don't have to use much of imagination to think, what does it mean for the satellites? What does it mean for rocketry? What does it mean for the management of workforces? What does it mean for biological warfare? There's so many different ways, and including who gets there first in terms of who then takes their technology around the world. China gets there first. They're the ones who go to sub-Saharan Africa. They're the ones who go to Europe. They're the ones who go to Latin America.
We've seen it with Huawei, ZTE.
Yeah, exactly, which is scary. So we need to win that battle.
Yeah. I do see there's one last question over here. Come on down, sir.
All right, first, I'd like to thank Board of Trade for organizing such an opportunity for GMU students to come and engage in important conversations regarding novel technologies. So thank you so much. As a fellow GMU student, I also wanted to ask two questions. So one, how would you want to encourage the ethical use of AI in the classroom in order to prevent sort of an AI brain drain on future generations of current students who are going to become leading members in the next generation of U.S. workforce? And also, as a person participating in university hackathons, engaging business x AI hackathons, there have been concerns over predatory AI encouraging predatory consumer behavior because AI is able to look at consumer trends and able to provide marketing and ads, which really trigger people's impulse buys and really driving consumerism to an all new high, especially in a globalized market. So those are two questions.
Wow. The first one's a lot easier.
Yeah.
And I just
you
took
have to warm up to it, right?
Yeah. I was having dinner a couple months ago with a bunch of wonderful high-end AI people who were astonished to learn that I was doing my homework in Vim on the, rather than using Claude or any of the other things. And they said, you're the only guy in the class that's not using AI to answer your homework. But I also have a professor who gets upset when he sees a cell phone or a computer in the classroom, because he wants it handwritten the whole way, because he said that's the only way you'll ever understand it. If you let the AI do your homework, you're never going to be a very good coder. So, on the second half, I don't know how we deal with that. I do know we had an interesting dinner with Eric Schmidt a couple months ago.
Former CEO of Google.
Yeah, exactly. Who was, and he was more on the business side. That somebody created a new advertising twist that they just were going to try out, and it exploded overnight. And all of a sudden, Google, as more than a scrape by fly-by-night, was born. That ability, and now we see it with TikTok, that ability to find algorithms that feed exactly what we want, so that we now can spend 5 hours a day on our cell phone, is scary. And I don't know what the social science answer to that is.
Thank you, sir.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you to the Greater Washington Board of Trade, the Costello School of Business. What an amazing opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Wonderful to see you. I really appreciate it.